ahead of this session. There's so much to cover in this next hour, but yeah, really pleased to have these amazing guests joining me today for this discussion. And it really comes on the back of some of the research that we've seen that shows just 10% of accredited coaches at the Winter and Summer Olympic Games across the last 10 years have been female, which is at that elite level. But we see that similarly across grassroots sport in some sports too. So really not seeing women in those high profile roles. Clearly there are some here on this call, but we don't see it generally. And so today we're going to explore why that might be and what needs to change there too. So I'm just going to go around and introduce my guests for today, and then really please, if people want to put Q&A into the Q&A section, questions as we go through, we'd love to take some of those later as well too. But the guests that I've got with me today, Kelly Lindsey, who's sporting director at Lewes FC, former head coach of the Afghanistan women's national team and the Moroccan women's national team. And Kelly has already been a guest on the Game Changers as well, actually. So I should make reference to that. So you can hear all of Kelly's career story and all she's done on a previous Game Changers podcast too. Giselle, who I've been trying to get on the Game Changers forever, but this is the way I've got her on through the webinar. Giselle's now director of rugby at Ealing Trailfinders and was formerly director of rugby for Wasps Women. And we worked together. We're on the RFU's sorry, I couldn't speak there for a second. The Diversity Inclusion Advisory Group, Giselle's co-chair there. So that's where we've done lots of work in the last year or so. Giselle was also the first level 4 rugby coach, female rugby coach in the UK, and has coached in academies. We're going to talk a bit about that in a moment, some of the work she's done in academies in the past as well. Jess Freeman, and Jess has spoken recently at the Women's Sport Collective at one of our sessions, very kindly spoke there. Jess is a community coach at the Harlequins Foundation and also a rugby coach at Dorking, and back to playing a little bit too now as well. And finally, Sarah Kelleher. Sarah is a former England hockey coach who's leading on the facilitation at Sport England's Women in Coaching Taskforce, and she's also an assistant senior coach for the Irish women's hockey team, a recent appointment there too, but really working across that space in coaching. So I think you'll agree it was fantastic crew here to answer some of those questions and explore this area of women's sports coaching. And I wonder if I can start. I'm going to kind of go around the houses to begin with, and we won't take the whole session in that way. But just perhaps share some of your experiences of being a woman in sports coaching, and also where your journey started there too. I don't know, like, who will I pick on? Kelly, shall I start with you, as you and I have already had that conversation, but a little bit of your background would be fantastic, please.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate. I mean, I grew up in a place where I had lots of opportunity, and hence because of that, I started coaching at 13 years old, and of course not at a professional level, but I think that really helps to start build that confidence, and you volunteer and you're out on the pitch and you're around parents and players and you're learning the ecosystem. And so through my whole playing career, I coached at high school level, at club level, and different camps and clinics. And so as I was transitioning out of being a professional athlete and knowing my career was coming to an end, because I had many, many injuries, so I was sort of already planning for the future, I started looking for my first sort of professional coaching job, if you will. And I'll say that that transition period is really difficult for players as they go. And probably the best advice I got at that time was a previous coach of mine said, play until you absolutely can't play anymore, and then transition into being a coach. And I think that really helped me, because it is 2 different lifestyles and 2 different roles. And once I rolled into coaching, I coached at the university level in the US, and then professionally. And then sort of my personality is to discover the world and culture. So I've taken myself internationally and really to learn for myself. How do you develop the game? How do you coach in different cultures? So that sort of led me to where I am today.
Fabulous. Thank you, Ken. I know we'll look a little bit more about that whole athlete into coaching move too as we move through. Jess, do you want to share next?
Yeah, so I actually fell out of sport for a really long time and messed around in the music industry for far too long. And I did the classic grassroots entry back in through my child. Joined a local rugby club. I come from a big rugby family, obviously, and rugby was my background. Wanted him to enjoy that too. And no other parent was really around or stood up. Unfortunately, they decided that a woman shouldn't be the person that was a head coach. So they asked one of the the young guys in the Colts, who after one Saturday night didn't turn up on a Sunday morning, and so I took over. And that was, the classic, parent steps in. But then really was inspired, really enjoyed just watching these little kids get so much out of the sport and what you can deliver. So I decided to take my coaching a bit more seriously, take it a bit further. Was inspired by Giselle, who we'll find out later, but managed to get my coaching qualifications up to a level 2, and that's when I applied to come and join Harlequins and join their community side of things, so that actually I could go and be one of their only female coaches at the time. We do still have a few more, but we make sure that we can go out to that community and at that grassroots level and make sure that there is a female coach on that visibility and on that stage. And so then from there, I've got very heavily involved at Dorking Rugby Club, where they asked me if I wanted to then go to the next level of coaching, where I've become the assistant head coach for the women's team as we've gone into the national leagues. And then also they asked me to pull my boots back on, which has been fun and interesting.
Thank you so much. Are they voluntary roles that you're doing there, Jess, just to...
So for Dorking, it's completely voluntary, although there is some elements of paid when I get to the senior squad. We are very, very lucky. We have one director of rugby who sees men and women as parity. So we are treated the same and we have the same access in that role. And I am paid at Harlequins to coach across the community.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Sarah, would you? I'm trying to split my two rugby sports there, so I'll put you in the middle there.
Perfect. Yeah, I suppose my starting point for coaching was through my playing days. I think I had some great experiences of coaching, maybe particularly in the school years, some of the teachers who really supported me to grow, and I really found my confidence and grew as a person, and found my voice. And I just realized sport really helped me in that way. But I also had some really probably negative experience of coaching, and I became really fascinated about how do you create an environment where people can really flourish and be themselves and perform to their best. And actually I moved to the UK to play hockey and to work here.
I wasn't sure it was me frozen. I think
about...
Oh, you're back. You're back.
I'm back, am I?
Continue. Yes.
I'm talking away to myself in any case, but I was saying I moved to the UK and started playing with a really top side here. And I think the coach's role was often as a facilitator as well. And when you get a group of people who are really empowered to be themselves and own the game, I think it was really fascinating. And I went into talent development and worked in the England pathway for 10 years and lead coach of the under-18s. And just to work with players and see them grow as people and players, whether they went on to be GB internationals or not, there's a thrill to it. And now obviously I'm working with the Irish team, and it's great to go full circle back home to Ireland to coach, having played for Ireland previously as well. So it's definitely addictive, you can't stay away from it.
I love that. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. And Giselle, in terms of your background.
So I started off as PE teacher. That was the way I was in and taught for 14 years alongside my playing career. And when I finished playing to have my family, I really still wanted to be involved in sport, similar to Sarah, in having an absolute fascination for how people do things and performance and what makes one person do one thing and one person do another, and how the teams bond and why do some groups go really well. All of that stuff just absolutely fascinates me, still does. And so I literally transitioned into coaching whilst I was having my family, which was quite interesting at certain times, the little ones on the pitch and doing various bits and bobs as you juggle life to make that happen. And then got opportunities in the women's game quite quickly, coached Wasps, which, I ended up in a situation where you're coaching your peers. And that's actually one of the hardest things to do. But at the time I didn't realize it, straight off how actually difficult that is. But if you go through that, and a lot of coaches, I think, particularly in the women's game, start with that, and it is a really tough thing to do. And then got into the men's game via my accreditation stuff. When I was doing my level 3 first off, I met director of rugby of London Irish's academy at the time, Toby Booth, who had no issues at all about the fact that I was female. He sat and listened to me chat rugby in our assessments, and just went, right, I want her to work in with our young players. And the young players at the time are now have gone through the system and have played international rugby and what have you. So I was desperately privileged to work with athletes of that ilk. And then I've gone in the amateur game, the professional game, the men's game, the women's game, international game, club game. I've worked right across the whole thing. So and now got a new challenge at Ealing Trailfinders. So really exciting times, and still as passionate about it now as I was when I started.
Fantastic. That's lovely to hear, isn't it? Lovely to hear. And in terms of those numbers, obviously I cited at the beginning, that's 10% in terms of Olympic and Winter Olympic sports. But I wonder if any of you have got, we were talking earlier about this kind of statistics of, we feel there is that gender disparity, and you can see that visually when you look across sports. But in terms of your sports, where that gender imbalance is at the moment, either grassroots or at the professional level too. Sarah, I might come to you first of all, because I know that we had a bit of a conversation beforehand, but in terms of hockey, what does it look like?
Yeah, it's interesting, because when we were talking, we were saying actually it's hard to find these figures, which is in itself worrying that they're just not there. And it shows that we do need to measure them to be able to know that we're shifting them. So while we've seen, you know, the unstoppable rise of women's sport, but we haven't seen that equate into coaching, and that therein lies a problem that we do need to look into. So what you find in the world of hockey, it's seen more as a women's game in terms of participation, and yet that doesn't transfer into the coaching world. You'll see at grassroots level a higher level, but as soon as you go into like elite performance, and I think the coach education pathway is often a good example of that. So at the sort of fundamental level, you can have 75% of women, and this is through some of the Irish hockey coach education, but as you get up to level 2, that drops down to about 25% of that. So, you know, coaches are dropping out as it's going through that elite level. So there was an interesting piece of research looking at the top hockey teams, premier club teams, and there's 132 clubs across the top 6 nations. So that's 132 lead coaches, and at the time it was looked at, there was 10 women head coaches, and only one of those was a head coach of a men's side. So don't know what the stats for that are this season, but they're always in flux. So I think that's it's an interesting picture. And, you know, when I talk to organizations about, you know, we need to measure these things to make sure that we can then change the dial, I think that's an important piece for us to now start really looking at through the process. Definitely interested to hear in other sports.
Yeah, and interesting. We're going to come in a minute to talk about the reasons why, without preempting later conversation. But often it's because women haven't been seen to play in those sports, but that isn't the case in hockey. Like the women have been playing, so it isn't as if they haven't had experience of the game in order to coach, which it might be historically for rugby and football and cricket and so on. Kelly,
bags of hockey experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find, I mean, obviously, because I've sort of worked around the world, I have a lot of different perspective on it. But when it comes to actual statistics, I think it's really difficult to find them, and like accurate ones that are up to date. Often you find them 3 to 5 years back. But in the US college system, there's a report called there's the Tucker Center out of the University of Minnesota, and they've been doing this report. And I only bring that up because when I first got into coaching back in, 2000, you know, they were reporting like 9 or 10% of women were college coaches. But if you go back to 1972, there were 90% of women in coaching, leading college teams. So it went from 90%, it went to 10%, and now they're back up to about 40 to 47%. And I just think it's interesting when you have somebody who's tracking it, the statistics, you see them grow because somebody's holding them accountable. And I think that's really important in the big scheme of how women will grow and diversity will grow, is we actually have to hold ourselves in organizations accountable. But in women's football, if you talk about the elite level, there's a couple things like UEFA licenses, which is really the gold standard of coaching licenses, and you need them to coach in Europe and around the world. Only 3% of all the UEFA licenses are in women, in female coaches, only 3%. And when you look at the UEFA Pro license, which is the highest license, I think it was 2015 or 2017, in that range, there were 67 women that had a UEFA Pro, 9,400 men had the UEFA Pro.
Oh my God.
So when you talk about opportunity in this, but now in sort of the elite women's game, I'd say in the top 5 leagues in the world, you might have one and every 5 coaches be a woman. Might. You're still at about 10 to 20%. But I think the most interesting fact in women's football right now is in the last World Cup, 2019, 24 teams, 9 were female coaches. In the quarterfinals, 5 of them were female coaches. And in the final, 2 were female coaches. So I think that that's really like this growth and this progression, that when we give women enough time to be in the game and we professionalize the game and we professionalize the environment and give them the opportunity to grow through it, they're extremely successful, technically, executive, management, all the things that go along with it.
Fabulous. No, that's really good. I'm writing down notes on my own webinar here. Some of those numbers that I can listen back, can't I? But that's extraordinary, isn't it? And I think that is so important, isn't it? As we see that success, where I think of Serena, Wiegman this summer, but almost celebrating that success that we're going to come on to talk about role models in a moment. I don't know, Jess, Giselle, whether you've got thoughts in terms of and I don't want specific numbers and statistics, but how much it is measured within rugby. And again, a bit of it's the anecdotal, isn't it? Look across the teams that are playing at the World Cup at the moment, etc. Grassroots, I'm interested too.
Yeah, well, I think, it is interesting. And I think it'd be really important that message of saying we need to actually measure this now, because I think the rise of women's rugby and where it's going is huge. And the number of teams, girls teams and women's teams, certainly across the leagues that I'm playing at, is growing enormously. I coach in a club where we have about 5 male coaches, and now we have about 5 female coaches. When I joined 5 years ago, there was just 1. Now she's been tireless and amazing, and Pip is brilliant. Seeing women coaches and seeing the players that I have, a lot of them are now going through their coaching qualifications. They've had kids, they've returned to the sport, their kids are now 5, 6, 7, and they're saying, well, actually, I can do this too. And so we are seeing more of our players that have then seen that visibility come through. And I'd love to see where that goes in sort of 10 years' time, because I just think it will hopefully, and this whole year in this Women of Sport in this year, but certainly within rugby and the Rugby World Cup, I'm hoping that actually we'll see from now.
Thank you. Giselle, what are your thoughts on that in terms of the visibility, really?
I think from my perspective, just speaking from my own personal experience, I qualified for my level 4 in 2008, and the next female that qualified for the level 4 was 2018, and that was Jo Yap. So there was a 10-year gap, which is ridiculous. But what's happened now, because of the explosion of women's sport and what have you, the RFU made an executive decision that they needed to support females to that level. So now we have several more, still not anywhere near enough, but definitely several more because of a targeted approach. And the World Cup as whole from World Rugby put an intern female coach in with every single side, which I think from a theoretical point of view was a good idea, but from a practical point of view, you've got completely different experiences from those coaches. So, for example, Whitney Hansen with the Black Ferns, she has actually now become the forwards coach and is in control of what's going on from there. So she's had a fabulous experience from it. But other females that have gone out there are not really sure what their role is, have been sort of not marginalised, but it's been very, very difficult for them to contribute to the team, and have been going out with a title of intern coach means that straight away you're making life quite difficult for them, because you're almost saying, well, what's your experience compared to the male coaches that you're working with? So I think there's lots for us to look at and learn from there. The idea is great, but the practicalities of it has got to be, I think, really thought through to make it a real positive experience for people. There's only one head coach out, female head coach out in the World Cup, Leslie McKenzie with Japan. In the Premier 15s now, there are head female coaches and more happening all the time, and that is fantastic. But as the product grows, and it is a sensational product now. More male coaches want to be involved, which is an interesting dynamic that's coming along, because initially it wasn't something that perhaps male coaches thought they wanted to be involved in. Now they really want to be involved in it. So how that will develop will be very, very interesting.
Yeah, thank you. And that's exactly to Kelly's point about what happened with NCAA and the male coaches coming across into female sport when there was funding and money available and it became more profession. Obviously, that 90% of women coaching women's team shifted, as we saw there too. So yeah, it is interesting to see that change there. I guess a big question really, but why do you think it matters? Why does it matter that we need more women in coaching? Why does that gender, a bit of a broad, profound question, but in terms of women's sports specifically, also, why do you think it matters that we have more female coaches? I don't know who would like to take that.
I'll start with it in a general sense. For me, I think it's to show that women can be women in sports. I think it's really, people don't realize how much they judge a female because she doesn't act like a male on the sideline, or maybe she does act like a male and then she gets judged for that. There's a lot of judgment in sport. Male managers get judged, female managers get judged. But I think what's so important, if we want diversity, we have to allow people to be their authentic self on the sideline, whatever that is, the way they dress, the way they handle themselves, the way they talk to their players, the referees, all those things. And I often see young female coaches, whether it's age or experience, they struggle this identity crisis of what does it mean to be a manager or a head coach as a female, because they've never seen it. So one thing I've sort of noticed in my own travels of the world of, things I never intended for this to happen, but what I've learned by traveling the world and sort of being my authentic self is how many people say, what? Just in society, you're a woman, you travel the world alone, you don't have a man, you don't have a partner, you do this alone and you do whatever you want. There's so many societies out there that just think that's crazy. So even though it's not on the football pitch, it's not in the boardroom, it's just walking along the streets. Like, these are the societal things that have to change by allowing women to be their authentic and unique selves. And when you get to see that on the sideline, in the locker room, in the boardroom, we stop judging women to be this industry, like monkey of a man, like the mirror image of a man. And we have to start seeing women in this place to understand what a female leader in sport looks like. And I think that's one of the most difficult things for women, is we get judged because we don't act and talk the same way as our male counterparts, but it doesn't mean we don't have the same or better technical expertise, the same or better communication and dialogue. We're just different, and we should be allowed to be different and stop being judged for not being a man and not acting like a man on the sideline.
And Sarah, what do you think? I guess you were kind of working across a number of sports in terms of involvement with the Sport England Taskforce. Is that something that you've seen and witnessed?
Yeah, and I think what Catley's talking to there, I think, is one of the biggest issues. That sort of coaching is a male default, and all of that goes with it. So I think absolutely, there's so much to be said for being able to be yourself and actually champion women, to create role models for others. So I think it really matters that women can lead the world in a really positive way, and we can lead the world on the pitch and off the pitch in a better way. I think if I came down to fundamentally why it matters, because it's the right thing to do. It's justice. It's this is about fairness. And we should work toward a fairer world. It isn't about equality. It's much more about giving people opportunities to go after what they want in life, every single person. So there's a whole shift in cultural society that we can do through who's walking the sidelines and coaching. And I think often that higher purpose is often embedded into why we coach. We want to make a difference at that level. And so with Sport England, we've created a women in coaching task force, and we've brought women from across and male allies from across all different sports to come together to say, how could we create a movement to shift the dial on women and coaching? And really, it's about understanding the problems at a deeper level, because people often understand the issues and they'll say, it's because women aren't confident. They have too many family commitments. They opt out. And I could go on. I probably could do the whole thing about all the reasons. I've had, you hear them every day. And actually, what are the underlying issues that we need people to understand at a deeper level? And that's where we need to have that system change happening. And too much of it is about, let's try and, you know, fix the women, they're lacking something, whereas actually we need to really fix the system. But we need to do it by shining a light on what's working, because things are happening, things are positive. And actually, if we can understand why they are and share that and together create that movement, I do believe we can make that change. And it's already happening from what we're hearing here about, you know, the World Cup, the same in the Hockey World Cup, the number of women coaches that were there, it's definitely going in the right direction. You know, women are proving that they are very competent coaches. They've just unfortunately have to prove it. It's not the starting point of acceptance. You've got to go, and that's one of the other big issues, that proving of it can be wearing, and that's where some women eventually drop out, because they have to prove themselves every other day, and it's you're scrutinized. And some people talk, people have references like death by 1,000 cuts. So people don't choose to opt out, they're forced to, and so we need to understand those issues at a deeper level. And I think that's what we're looking to do, is to help organizations and coaches themselves to understand they're part of a system that we need to change, and it's not your issue as a coach, it's a wider issue.
Jess, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I started coaching, I didn't do it for a feminist reason or to put myself out there as a woman. I did it because my kids needed a coach, and that was it. But I did really start to realise the importance of that visibility. And being out there, and we were talking earlier, I've just done a 2-day coaching camp at the Stoop in Twickenham for Quins. We've had a whole bunch of kids running around the pitch, boys, girls, everyone from age 5 to 15, who knew nothing now than they had a bunch of coaches from Quins. It just so happens that one of them happened to be female that day. And they've all gone home and they've just talked about their coaches, and a woman is just part of that conversation. And so actually it is a generational thing, and it is really important that the next generation of kids, boys and girls, for different reasons, just see and see those coaches on the pitch, because they know no different. So they will then take that through as they grow through the sport as well, and it will be seen as no different. For girls, they can see themselves. They can just see an image of themselves and can see that as something they can do. And for boys, they just won't see it as any different. And that's really, really important.
I think from my point of view, coaching is about developing people, yeah? And so when you have a diverse coaching team, you are able to develop more people, because just if you think about a rugby squad, there's about 45 people, athletes involved in a rugby squad. And if you just have a coaching team of 4 men, for example, then you're fundamentally missing the opportunity to connect with some of those athletes. If you have a female on a coaching team, then some of those athletes will connect to that female much more comfortably than they might to the male. And it doesn't, so when I was part of the coaching team at London Irish, the amount of first team players that would come to me to have a discussion about something, because I was perceived as non-threatening, was perceived as, I didn't have the macho thing, they didn't be that a certain way. The issues that were preventing them to perform, their performance blocks, would be discussed with me. And then I would go and then inform the head coaches that the reason this athlete is struggling is X, Y, Z. So by having a female on the coaching team there, it allowed some of the athletes, now some of the athletes never came near me, that's fine. And when I coached the female that, you know, for example, at Wasps, I would be very naive if I believed that I, as the head coach, was the one that all my athletes would connect with. Hence, I had a diverse coaching team, 2 males, 2 females, me being one of them. And all my athletes were either connected to one of those or to the strength and conditioner. They have somebody that they trust, that really unlocks who they are as an athlete, which then if there are issues off the field that are preventing them reach their full performance, they can discuss. Now, that diversity doesn't just have to be on gender, it's everywhere. The more diverse you can have of your management or coaching team or whatever team it is, you get diversity of connection, you get diversity of thought, you get diversity of different ways to sell your product to the athletes. And some athletes, you know, don't necessarily understand a game plan that's put out to them in a certain way. They need it in a different way. The more diverse the people in front of the athlete team, the more successful your team will be. And that is one of the major reasons that I believe that females are so desperately underrepresented in coaching teams. And we're not connecting with all the athletes in front of us.
And is there an assumption? It's interesting, isn't it? You're coming in, when you came in with your level 4, Giselle, into that pathway of the academy, and obviously we need coaches coaching our young players too. Do you feel there is across coaching a bit of an assumption that it's women that will coach the younger athletes, and as it moves up and it progresses and it's about performance elite athletes, that's not the place for women? Is that something that you've seen at all?
Yes, pretty similar to what Jess said, that the reason she started was because the kids needed a coach. Okay, and so the nurturing side of the majority of females will go, okay, that's me. But how ironic is that? Because when the athletes start their journey, that's the most critical time, where their habits are formed, where their skills are told you do it this way. And as they start to go through it, half the time when you pick up an athlete, say at 17, 18, their technique is hardwired already by the coaches that they've had when they're little. And we have this big thing that our best coaches should be at the top level. Actually, it should potentially be the other way around, but particularly the sort of 15 to 18 age group should have incredible coaches in front of them who can teach them how to be elite athletes, how to manage their time, how to technically do the things that they've got to do on the field as well, and tactically understand the game. So yes, there is that's an oxymoron for me, that is thought that way, and actually it should be the female coaches that you know, or the coaches at the beginning that foster the love of the sport, that foster the athlete wanting to continue to be involved in it. So I think it's a hugely privileged position to be working with young children on upwards through academies before they become hardcore elite athletes. So for me, that's a complete oxymoron.
Excellent. In terms of that grassroots, I guess that grassroots into elite, so we are seeing more campaigns and initiatives to encourage women to come at that grassroots level. And we can kind of address what's being done there, how we encourage more women to take those courses and step forward and get involved. But I think, Sarah, you mentioned that drop out to that next level as we transition up. So just to move on, I'd really like to look at some of the reasons that we might see that. So why coaching, and I don't want to call it almost elite coaching, because I think exactly as the point Giselle's made, it's all elite coaching, whether it is, but that paid for, what we might consider more professional with those teams, more senior competitive teams. Why is it that we perhaps don't see that transition from grassroots through? Why are we losing women at those points? Sarah, that was for you. But maybe I was
it? Sorry, I wasn't too sure.
Sorry.
Perfect. And yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because there's a whole lot of research out there on these issues, and recently through the Women in Coaching Taskforce, there's been a big insight review with recommendations done. And one of the things I felt, it's great reading about this research, but it's not so great when you've lived a lot of the experiences. You're like, okay, I recognize that. But I think that, you know, the more it gets into high performance, the more male dominated default coaching, what an ideal coach looks like, because now we're moving from nurturing into, you know, strong leadership, and actually these are the sort of cutting edge, technical, tactical, and it's owned in that sort of male default. And yes, that's changing, but it's there in that sort of underlying bias. So you don't sort of fit the bill from that perspective. And I think that fundamental piece is absolutely one of those big blockers within that. So you'll find, as you know, women look to go forward, they don't have the same role models to sort of show them the way. So, you know, if I can't see it, I can't believe it. So and also the networks, people talk about it like it's a labyrinth of, you know, subtle biases that you don't notice, but they all add up. But also there's always these informal networks where people, you know, talk to friends and give people opportunities. So you know, I could see myself as a coach starting here and other coaches going up because they had a friend in a role who brought them to a tournament. The next thing, they got more experience than me because they're, you know, the boys network was in action. And as a coach, if you call this out, you know, it can get you in trouble as well as an individual. People don't like you to tell them the sort of, to bringing these to the fore. I think that's changing too, because there's a greater recognition that actually we do need to speak out about these and do make that change. Because of that, we need to put structures in place because of the natural biases and the networks that happen that are all an informal level. We have to put like a coach development pathway, like we have a talent development pathway for our players. And most sports don't have that or hadn't got that. And now there's a recognition to do that. And it's that equity. It's not even around equality, because actually we're starting from a lower base. So we need to prop women up to give them the experiences.
Oh, I lost you a little bit, Sarah, so I'm going to cut across and in there.
On the board table, you know, so we need to get more on that way as well. So it's a complex area that we need to understand around these issues.
Thank you for that. And it's hugely complex. I've got a really interesting question there from Eden Simpson, who's a coach, a basketball coach, senior men's coach, and about the attitude of men and boys towards female coaches and having respect. So I'm interested to know, I think most of you have coached men and boys as well as women. So as a female in coaching, and again, not to go into too much detail, but have you ever had issues in terms of people respecting your ability? And is it around that technical knowledge? Is that assumption that we don't have that technical knowledge because maybe we've not played to a certain level, or because we are women? And I guess how you overcome that with the people that you're coaching. I don't know anybody wants to jump in there. Giselle, yeah.
I think from that point of view, and this might sound quite basic, but the first 10 minutes of your session in front of those athletes is so important. All athletes in my mind really want is a session that is it's progressive, that they're going to improve in and develop as individuals, that makes sense as they're doing it, that it's all connected and makes sense, that they enjoy and that they work hard in. Now, the athletes themselves, if they're receiving that, I don't think they really are that bothered that it's a male or female voice that they're hearing, provided you are doing those things and that they are getting from that session what they're after. And I just think that alongside some of the things that Sarah said, you have, at this stage of the women coaching development, you end up having to be better than your male counterparts to maintain the jobs that the opportunities are there, or to get those jobs. And there's a lot of pressure with that. That's hard to continually have to be better, to have to say, you know, people go, actually, yeah, that coach is really good, but you can't initially, you almost can't have an off day. And that's where I think support systems need to be in place for female coaches. And that will change, and people, you know, are acceptant now, I think, more, because I've been coaching for so long, and I'm sure that Kelly feels the same because she's been doing the same. I don't have that judgment anymore, because the reputation has, you know, we both coaching from 2000, you're okay with that, but I definitely had that as I developed. But those first 10 minutes in front of any athletes, once you show them that you are planned, you know, your session's progressive, that they're going to get out of it what they want, it carries on, everything's fine. It's that you know, perception that there's going to be an issue. Just out there, do your thing for the first 10 minutes, and lads have not ever had an issue with it because they've got out of the session what they want.
What has your experience been in that space, Kelly?
Yeah, I agree with Giselle. If you approach it as a professional and you have it organized and everything, people are on board. I think there's a few factors that come into this. There's obviously a natural bias that comes from living in life and growing up wherever you've grown up. And I think so much of ensuring women can actually integrate into a professional ecosystem of coaching and having that is the people around them. So it's the whole staff, it's everyone you put together. So the leaders of the organization, you have to put the puzzle pieces together with the people who will respect each other and create that environment so the players see nothing but that's a coaching staff. They're united, they're together, they get it, they're working as a unit. We trust them all. And that's coaching staff, that's performance staff, that's everyone around it. So a lot of it comes from the organization, the environment, you yourself having the confidence to come in. And what often happens in women's sports, and as females transition to coaching, they're young. And people don't recognize this. We're taking young women who have just finished their careers, we're putting them in high intense environments because look, tick the box, we put a woman there, it's great. You're setting her up for failure, and we need to recognize what's her age, what's her experience, and make sure we're supporting her journey. And the last thing, and I think it's, you know, a key to all teams, is you have to win the locker room. The players have to know that you are there for their journey. And I think male or female, when coaches come in with an ego, when coaches come in and it's all about them, you might have the locker room for a moment. You might be able to get through a few games. You might be able to get through a few seasons. But in the big picture of life, a male, a female, a human, they're on their professional journey. That's what it's about. They want their career to progress. And if you as a coach and a leader come in and you can take them on their journey and you can support them on their journey, then they're going to be bought in. And if you can be a key piece to their puzzle to achieve it and to become the best professional they can be, they don't care if you're male or female. They just want to know that you can get them to their ultimate goal. And regardless of your gender, they'll buy into that in the long run.
That's a positive, and it's a positive piece to hear, isn't it, in terms of that success? How important do we feel those role models? And we've talked about that visibility piece, and I mentioned, you know, Serena Wiegmann in the Euros, a different approaching style, a unity of the team, some music, all those things that I've sensed from the outside of looking in at a coach. Very different approach to lots of the men's professional football coaching that we've seen, and then having that success. So obviously it's the success that suddenly makes people wake up and think, oh, maybe there is a different way to coach. So so in terms of visibility, how much importance do you think that holds, and what more could we be doing there perhaps to shine a light and showcase the female coaches that are out there? Anybody? Jess, any thoughts there?
Well, I was going to say, yeah, I can jump in on that one, because I think starting with kids and giving that visibility early is really, really important. I also think it is that, and it's something Kelly touched on earlier, it is that authenticity and that non-compromising nature. I have never been anything but slightly crazy, slightly over-enthusiastic, passionate rugby coach that sometimes is slightly a little bit too infectious with 6-year-olds and gets them all a little bit riled up on a Sunday morning. But I won't compromise on that. It doesn't compromise my delivery. It doesn't compromise the quality of coaching that I give to whether they're 6, 15 or adult women. But what I think that does is that just shows that you can just be yourself and you can actually just enjoy it. And if you're enjoying your coaching, and if you're not feeling like you're constantly scrutinized and you're comfortable with what you're doing and you're supported and you feel comfortable in that role, you deliver such a better quality of coaching, and then the players will see that. And then from that, it just is a snowball effect. I mean, I faced a lot of sexism coming through at grassroots, a lot of it from the parents. I was asked if I was childcare, even though I was in full kit. I've been told I can't go on, years ago, I went on RFU courses, and I was the only woman in the room as usual, and I was asked that should I be playing the touch match when they used to do them as the sort of very much participation courses. So, you know, a lot of it is, again, back to that generational thing, but I think visibility is just the key to it all. If people can't actually see it, then they won't know about it, and the more that people see it, the more it becomes normalised.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. And I wonder, we've got different sports bodies and representatives on this webinar today, and they'll hear the podcast too. But I wonder from what organisations need to do. I know Giselle alluded a little bit to some of the work that World Rugby have done in terms of those intern coaches going with the national teams. Is it around quotas? Is it around female only courses? Are there anything, and again, I realise it's not one answer, but in terms of your thoughts of what you've seen that has worked or we could be doing more of, is there anything you would share that you think more organisations could be doing, both to encourage women to come in the first place, which is one of Chris Spedding's questions on the Q&A, what more could we do to be encouraging more women to come on, and then maintaining and increasing that in the future?
I might step in there because I think you want to encourage more coaches to come in, but unless we make the environment good for those coaches to come into, we may lose those coaches again. It's that sort of also what Kelly was talking about, those cliff edge experiences you might have got through the glass ceiling, but then you're giving a post that you're set up for failure. So it has to also start at the top, and that accountability. So working actually with UK Sport as well, and some of the research they've done at a board level, I think is really important. The more leadership we have that holds then accountability to creating that change is really important. And the research that's been done around women in sport leadership shows that quotas can be really valuable to creating that change, but they're only valuable if there's accountability and sanctions behind them. Otherwise, they're just a figure, and that they're actually measured over time. And they also found that actually if there are networks and leadership networks in place, that you'll see a higher level of representation in leadership roles. But again, those networks need to have influence and impact, and there should be males in part of those networks. And if those networks exist without impact and influence, you don't see the shift in representation happening at a board level. So there's a number of different key areas that are very practical steps that organizations can play at that level. So I do think you need to look at that leadership part as a really key part of that jigsaw, but then also you need to look at the understanding your organizational culture. What are the day-to-day practices that we should be changing, and really listening to the experiences of women in the sport, women in coaching, women in leadership. And that's the bit I think organizations aren't doing enough of as well within that. And then there's loads of policies and loads that you could do at that next level. But I think those two areas, if you put a focus on that, you can create a lot of change. I think, Jess, you were going to jump in there as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I actually know Chris, hello, hi, and I've done many courses with him and the RFU, and one of the things they have changed recently, going back into those old days of the courses where I'd be the only woman on the course, and it was all very right, coaches, get your boots on, we're going to do this practically and you're going to play, and we'd play touch, and I'd be the only female, and I'd just be running and scoring 1,000 tries because no one was going to touch it. All the men would be like this and then get scared, and I'm just like, yeah, whatever, I'm bombing through. One of the changes that I've noticed with the course delivery recently is that actually they've got kids. So they've asked the team, the coach and the club that the course is being delivered to say, well, can you just provide us with an age appropriate team and blah, blah, blah. And so the coaches are now observing and doing a lot of watching, and it's taken out that element of it then doesn't matter. There isn't, I mean, I'm quite a strong woman. I really didn't care playing with a whole load of men. That was absolutely fine. But not all women would want to do that and would feel comfortable with that. So actually by removing that barrier of play, and again, it comes to that point of a good coach doesn't necessarily have to have played in that sport. So by removing that, you are going to do a practical based assessment and stuff with other coaches, and we're all going to step in, and actually by utilising the children, which is how you should learn because that's how the coaching you're going to deliver it to. Those subtle changes are really important, as well as the much bigger picture.
That's a fantastic point there. Thanks. Sorry, Kelly. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I think at where we're at with women's sports is we really all need to be thinking as organizational bodies and governing bodies, what does the women's game need? And what do women in our game need, whether they're coaching the men, the youth, the women's side, whatever. We are not making decisions based on what the women need, because it's very rare that you sit in a room and dialogue about the experience of a woman in these sporting environments. People are not asking how we walk in our shoes. Men are not asking to walk in our shoes. They're not asking us questions. It's very, very rare when I sit with a man that he ever truly asks about my deep experience in sport. What's been harmful, what's been helpful, how I got there. Rarely. It's always a talk. It's banter. It's just talking about the game. It's just talking about the game. And that's where men align with other men. So if we can create more of a dialogue, because you're asking us to walk in your shoes, but you're not asking what it's like to walk in our shoes. And when that dialogue comes across governing bodies and organizations, things will change, because the men who will have that dialogue, who are great allies, suddenly go, oh my gosh, yeah, I've never thought about that. Makes total sense. Why don't we do that? So I think that's when you know you have a true ally, people who really want to develop the women's game because they're asking the right questions. And I think when you ask the right questions, it gets very strategic and understandable. And then barriers can be removed quite quickly because it's just, some of the things are so simple, but if you just don't have the dialogue, you're going to miss them. And I think the other side to it is we're comparing practical opportunities. And I just think practical opportunities, let's use England football for an example on the women's side. You have only 24 clubs who might have a full-time female coach. Not even a female coach, might have a full-time opportunity for a female coach. 24. And I know out of those 24, they're not all full-time coaches. So in this entire country, if a woman can only go coach in women's football, she probably has 22 opportunities on her CV to say she's a full-time head football coach. Men in this country have how many layers? 4 layers of professional. How many layers into non-league to say that they are a professional? Because if a man puts it on his resume, he's a professional. But if a woman puts it, she's in tier 4, she's not a professional. So the actual practical opportunities that come up on a CV, which means organizationally, we need to change the way we recruit. We need to change the way we interview. We need to change the system and the process of how we go find females and how we take them on the journey and how we bring them into our club. So future proofing and future planning. I'm going to go find the best females. I'm going to bring them in at whatever level that is right for them. And I'm going to plan to support them for the next 10 years because they are the future of my club. That is rarely happening in women's sports. Most clubs and most people who recruit for a women's job will say, oh, no women applied. And it's true, they don't. But a big piece to going and getting women is caring enough to going and getting women and having the dialogue and figuring out why they didn't apply. So most of them don't apply because they've had a horrific experience in sport at some point. They've been cut down, there's so many cuts, the knives in the back, the setup for failure. So have a dialogue, understand why they're not applying, meet them where they're at, take them on a development journey and future plan. But most clubs and organizations don't take the time for that. But if we really care about the women's game, then we really have to think, what do those women's games need? Where is it at now? And how do we plan for 5 or 10 years of success?
Sorry, Giselle, jump in.
I concur with everything that's been said, but I think the only thing that I would add is value. Really value the females that you've got in your organization. And there are hundreds of ways to do that, such that, and Kelly touched on it earlier, such that the athletes perceive you to be, because every coach around you, you can, within seconds, you can elevate someone or crush someone by what you say in front of the athletes about that person. And I just think that if we celebrate and value what women bring to the environments that they're working in, they will grow in confidence, they'll grow in stature and all of those things. And the opportunities are the other things. I got a particular break in my career where the person that sat and listened to me chat on about rugby in my level 3 she knows what she's talking about. So she's in. And I got an opportunity there that was lucky, not really because it was planned. And we need to make opportunities for coaches to do that. But I don't know that I'm a big fan of quotas, because I think it sets females up to fail. I think that's, again, what Kelly, Sarah said, that if you say we have to have a female in this particular job, I don't think that's right. Saying we have to have females in our organisation, that is, with the support that Kelly's alluded to around them for the next 10 years, that is beneficial. But saying a particular job must have is not looking at what the female A might want, B feels competent to do themselves, C is ready for, and that can be more detrimental. And then immediately you get this, see, women aren't up to it. And that's where that, people are almost waiting and setting people up to fail so they can say that. And so I'm not so sure that I believe that quotas are on actual jobs, but definitely supporting females in organizations. But the value the people that you've got and really support and celebrate.
Thank you. Kelly's point made me think. I remember speaking to AP and Alliance Premier 15's head of rugby, actually, of our whole club, when they'd appointed again another man to run the team, and he pushed back and said it isn't enough, exactly that, to say we've got no women applying. Why have we got no women applying? What do we need to do differently? And it was really refreshing to hear somebody, you know, it wasn't just the complaining that there are no women out there, you know, where there clearly are women out there, but why are they not coming for putting themselves forward, and what do we need to do to change there?
I think that's something that we as females have to take responsibility for, because we have a thing of saying, well, the job description says this and I haven't done this and this, so I'm not going to apply for it. Whereas our male counterparts go, well, there's 4 or 5 things on there I've never done, but hey, I'll be fine. And so they go in and believe that, whereas we feel we've got to be fully qualified before we go in. And I think that's something that as females, we must take responsibility for, and know that just because there's a couple of things on there that we're like, oh, I haven't actually ticked that one off, well, we'll tick it off in the job. We'll be fine, because we've got the rest of it. And I'm being generalistic here, but 80-20, 80% of females will only apply for a job if they have ticked off and feel that they can really smash it out of the park from day one. Whereas our male counterparts are like, nah, I've got this, and off they go. And we have to take responsibility for that. That's not their fault, that's ours.
Thank you so much. I'm going to close. I'm conscious of, I could talk to you all forever, but just in terms of closing, and clearly you're all amazing women that are doing brilliant things within the world of coaching. So if there were people listening to this, women listening to this, that might be considering coaching or want to progress in their coaching, is there a piece of advice or anything that you would share in terms of their kind of moving forward and progressing in the world of sports coaching? I've only got 2 minutes. Go.
Shall I go first on this one?
Go for it.
I would say that a couple of things. First of all, have a vision. Know what it is you're trying to achieve. Know yourself, what it is, what roles it is that you really feel you can add value and contribute to, and don't put a box around yourself. Just go with it. Yes, there might be things outside of comfort zones. Don't think, well, I can only do this, but know yourself and where you're about with it. Have your vision and don't put a box around yourself.
Lovely. Thank you, Giselle. Sarah, what were your thoughts? Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you've heard that this journey can be hard and that you will have setbacks, and there might be all sorts of knives going on at various stages. So I think it's really important to put a support network around you and make sure you can share these experiences openly with others, so that you realize it's not the issue isn't with you. You're not alone. Others feel this too. And then you give each other's confidence and you back each other up, and you know that's your allyship, all of those. So actually designing your support network is really important, including mentors. Get yourself a mentor, but also who's your sponsor within that's actually going to help you elevate your career if that's what you so wish. And I think we can be much more tactical around how we build that and make sure we just always refresh it and just talk to other people who are on this journey to support you to grow and to keep loving what you're doing along the way.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I don't want to plug the Women's Sport Collective, but I'm sure we could be doing more in that coaching world of networking community too. Jess, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I completely agree with both what Giselle and Sarah said, but also you have heard a lot of negative sides, and there have been battles, and we've all fought them along the way. But there is so much to get from being a coach, and you get so much reward from just a little kid learning something. Or I've got, you know, kids now that are now huge, and I'll be walking around the stoop if I'm working on one of the match days, and they'll be like, oh, hello, Coach Jess. And I'm like, oh, I know that face, but that's a hell of a lot of a bigger child now. And they remember it, and you've inspired them to do something. And I've had one kid this year that's had some real challenges with anger management, and we've given him a very, very strong structure at the rugby club. He's just had, and he came up bouldering up at me at the weekend and said, oh, miss, I've just had my best report card ever, and my attitude to learning, I got respect in PE. I've never had that. That is absolutely why I coach. There is no other reason to it. That is why I coach. So there is so much reward from it, even though it is a hard journey.
Thank you, Jess. And Kelly, no pressure, but if you could just round us off there in the last minute.
Well, I was just going to say, if all of us women out here in the world, if we want more seats at the table, we have to bring more chairs. So we're at the table. We need you out there to bring your chair to the table and just do it. You know, literally be brave, be bold, be authentically yourself, and trust that we need you in the game authentically as you are, not trying to mimic or be anything that you're not. It is difficult. It gives you gray hairs, but it also keeps you young. It definitely makes you smile. You have tons of stories. It enhances your life. And we need you. It's the authentic truth is we need you. We can't do it alone, and we can't progress the game without more women. So stop worrying about what you can't do and just bring what you can and understand it's a journey. And let's all be in it together to build the ecosystem for you to evolve in your journey and enjoy it and love it and get to wherever it is you want to go.
Fabulous. What a lovely way to finish. Thank you so much. Thank you. Really, really appreciate your time, to Giselle, Sarah, Jess and Kelly. And thank you everyone that's joined us today. We're spot on for finishing on the hour. And as I say, we will share this as part of the Game Changers podcasts in the months ahead. And we'll also share the webinar as a recording so we can share it with other people too. But thank you. Really, really appreciate you all taking the time. And I will stop recording now, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.